The Yale University lecture hall hummed with restless energy, its towering ceilings amplifying the murmurs of an expectant crowd. Golden light poured through tall, arched windows, casting long shadows across rows of polished wooden benches packed with students, professors, and Ivy League alumni. The air was thick with an unspoken consensus. This was a place of the elite, a sanctuary for those destined for greatness. On stage, the moderator, Professor Harold Vance, adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, his voice cutting through the chatter like a blade. Next up, representing a community college no one's heard of, Amara Ellis. A wave of laughter rippled through the room, sharp and mocking. Head swiveled, eyes zeroing in on the slight figure stepping onto the stage. Amara was small, her navy blazer hanging slightly loose on her frame, her braids meticulously gathered into a tight bun. She clutched a single notebook, its edges worn and frayed, and her scuffed, practical shoes clicked faintly against the hardwood floor. The Yale team, dressed in crisp tailored suits, exchanged smirks. "This'll be quick," one of them muttered, his voice carrying just far enough to draw chuckles from the front row. Amara's gaze swept the crowd, lingering for a moment on the sea of skeptical faces before settling. She placed her notebook on the podium, her hand steady, her expression unreadable. But her eyes, those eyes held a spark, a quiet fire that no one in the room could name yet, a force that would soon unravel their smug certainty. Professor Vance's lips twitched into a smirk, his bias barely concealed. "Topic: should affirmative action be abolished? Ms. Ellis, you're arguing in favor. You have 5 minutes." The timer began, its digital numbers glowing red on the wall. The crowd leaned forward, not out of respect but out of morbid curiosity. Who was this nobody, this interloper from some obscure community college, daring to challenge Yale's finest? They expected a stumble, a nervous ramble, a quick surrender. They had no idea Mara wasn't here to play their game. She was here to rewrite the rules entirely, to turn their laughter into silence and their arrogance into awe. Amara Ellis was 20 years old, a first-generation student from a small, dusty town in Georgia, where dreams often withered under the weight of reality. Her community college, tucked away in a strip mall, barely had a debate team, let alone the budget for one. She'd grown up in a cramped apartment, her mother pulling double shifts at a diner, her hands rough from scrubbing dishes to keep the lights on. Amara learned early that words were her weapon, sharp, precise, forged in late-night study sessions under flickering fluorescent lights in a library that smelled of mildew. She wasn't loud or showy. Her quiet confidence unsettled people. Her soft southern accent wove through her words, each syllable deliberate, carrying the weight of someone who'd fought for every opportunity. To the Yale crowd, she was an outsider, a token invitee to pad the tournament's diversity quota. They didn't know she'd been preparing for this moment her entire life, that every book she'd read, every argument she'd honed, was a step toward this stage. Across from her stood Ethan Caldwell, the Yale team captain, the embodiment of everything Amara was not. At 22, Ethan was polished perfection, his blonde hair neatly combed, his tailored suit a silent testament to his pedigree. His father was a senator, his mother a law professor, their names etched on Yale's donor walls. Ethan had been groomed for greatness since he could walk, his debate record untarnished, his charm a weapon he wielded with ease. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his smirk a silent challenge. Amara was a formality, a stepping stone to another trophy. Professor Vance mirrored Ethan's arrogance. A Yale alumnus with a reputation for favoring his own, he'd introduced the Yale team with glowing praise, their accolades recited like a liturgy. Amara's introduction, by contrast, was curt, almost dismissive, as if her presence was an inconvenience. The power imbalance was stark. This was Yale's domain, and Amara was an intruder, a trespasser on sacred ground. Amara stepped the podium, her notebook unopened, its worn cover a stark contrast to the sleek tablets of her opponents. The room fell into a hush, not out of reverence but anticipation, like spectators waiting for a gladiator fall. "Affirmative action," she began, her voice steady, almost soft, "is a policy rooted in belief that systemic inequities exist. To argue for its abolition, I must first prove those inequities are gone. Let's examine the evidence." Her tone was calm, deliberate, like a lawyer setting a trap in a courtroom. Ethan raised an eyebrow, his amusement plain. The crowd shifted in their seats, waiting for the inevitable stumble, the moment she cracked under the weight of their expectations. She didn't. Amara launched into her argument with surgical precision, citing Harvard's 2018 admissions data, showing racial disparities in acceptance rates, the 2020 census detailing persistent wealth gaps across ethnic groups, and the landmark Grutter versus Bollinger case that upheld affirmative action's necessity. Her facts were unassailable, her delivery unhurried, each point building on the last like bricks in a fortress. Ethan scribbled notes furiously, his smirk fading into a tight line. The Yale team had expected a nervous rant, a clumsy defense they could dismantle with ease. Instead, they faced a wall of logic, each statistic a blow to their confidence. Ms. Ellis, Professor Vance interrupted, his voice thick with condescension. This is a debate, not a lecture hall. Please address the motion directly. The crowd tittered, a few clapping as if he'd scored a point. Amara paused, her eyes locking onto Vance's, unflinching. I am, she said, her voice quiet but firm, then resumed as if he hadn't spoken. Ethan took the stage next, his posture relaxed, his voice smooth as polished glass. Ms. Ellis makes valid points, but she's missing the broader picture. Affirmative action distorts meritocracy. It punishes those who work tirelessly, like my teammates here, who earned their place at Yale through dedication. The crowd nodded, some clapping louder, their approval reflex. The jab was subtle but unmistakable. Amara didn't belong here, not among the deserving. She stood still, her face a mask of composure, but her pen tapped her notebook. Once, twice, a faint rhythm unnoticed by most. To those paying attention, it was the sound of a mind sharpening its blade, preparing to cut through the veneer of privilege. Amara's rebuttal was devastating. Mr. Caldwell speaks of meritocracy as if at a level playing field. Let's talk data. In 2023, legacy admissions at Ivy League schools accounted for 14% of accepted students, despite legacies being less qualified on average. SAT scores, GPAs lower across the board. Meritocracy, or privilege masquerading as merit? The room fell silent, the air heavy with shock. Ethan's jaw clenched, his pen frozen mid-note. A few students in the back exchanged wide-eyed glances, their whispers barely audible. Professor Vance adjusted his glasses, his smile replaced by a thin frown. Amara wasn't just debating. She was dismantling the very foundation of their world, exposing the cracks they spent years pretending didn't exist. The debate shifted to cross-examination, the tension in the room palpable. Ethan stood, his confidence returning like a boxer shaking off a hit. Ms. Ellis, you argue inequities persist, but isn't affirmative action just reverse discrimination? Why should someone like me be penalized for factors outside my control? His tone was slick, rehearsed, designed to trap her in a moral corner. The crowd leaned in, expecting her to falter, to trip over the nuance of his question. Amara didn't blink. Mr. Caldwell, you mentioned factors outside your control. Let's discuss those. Your father's donations to Yale, public record, $2.5 million over 5 years. Didn't hurt your application, did they? A collective gasp swept the room, sharp and sudden. Ethan's face flushed crimson, his polished facade cracking. That's irrelevant, he stammered, his voice betraying a hint of panic. Is it? Amara pressed, her tone still soft but now laced with steel. Or is it evidence that the system you defend rewards wealth over merit? She reached into her notebook, pulling out a document, a 2024 article from a reputable journal detailing Yale's donor-driven admissions practices. The crowd murmured, heads turning, whispers growing louder. Professor Vance banged his gavel, his voice sharp. Ms. Ellis, stick to the topic. But the damage was done. The room was buzzing, and Ethan's teammates looked like they'd been hit by a freight train. Amara wasn't finished. In her next speech, she shifted gears, her voice steady but relentless. Let's talk about access. My community college has a 12% graduation rate. Not because students lack talent, but because they lack resources. Textbooks we can't afford. Professors stretched thin. Yale's endowment is $41 billion. My school's is $1.2 million. If we're debating fairness, let's start there. She cited budget reports, enrollment statistics, even a 2022 lawsuit against Yale for discriminatory admissions practices. Each fact landed like a precision strike, undeniable and piercing. Ethan's notes piled up, his responses growing weaker, repetitive, his earlier confidence unraveling. The Yale team whispered frantically, their faces pale. The crowd, once dismissive, now hung on Amara's every word. Something was shifting, and everyone felt it. The final round loomed, the topic shifting to a hypothetical. If affirmative action were abolished, how would universities ensure diversity? Ethan went first, his answer polished but hollow. Vague promises of outreach programs and merit-based scholarships that sounded rehearsed, detached from reality. The crowd clapped, but the applause was tepid, almost polite. They weren't here for Ethan anymore. They were waiting for Amara. She stepped to the podium, her notebook still closed, her presence commanding despite her small frame. "Before I answer," she said, her voice steady, almost quiet, "I need to clarify something. You've all assumed I'm just a community college student. That's not the full story." The room froze, every eye locked on her. Professor Vance leaned forward, his gavel forgotten. Ethan's eyes narrowed, his hands gripping the edge of his chair. Amara's voice filled the hall, unwavering. "I'm also a finalist of the Rhodes Scholarship, selected for my research on systemic bias in higher education. I've clerked for Judge Aisha Patel, who overturned a discriminatory admissions policy in 2023. And I'm here because I earned it, not through donations, not through legacy, but through work." The silence was absolute, a void that swallowed every whisper, every shuffle. Then a single clap broke the stillness, followed by another, until the room erupted in applause. Students stood, cheering, some shouting her name. Ethan's face drained of color, his teammates frozen beside him. Professor Vance's mouth opened, then closed, his authority evaporating. Amara continued, her voice rising now, a tide of conviction. "You asked about diversity without affirmative action? You can't ensure it until you dismantle the systems that keep people like me out. Legacy admissions, donor privileges, bias standardized tests. That's not theory, that's data." She opened her notebook at last, revealing pages of handwritten notes, charts, and citations, each meticulously organized. "I brought receipts." The crowd roared, a tidal wave of sound. Ethan sank into his chair, his teammates stunned into silence. Professor Vance tried to regain control, his voice lost in the chaos. Amara wasn't just winning the debate. She was exposing the room's hypocrisy, their laughter, their assumptions. She was rewriting the narrative, turning their stage into her platform. The judges huddled, their faces grim, their whispers urgent. Ethan tried one last rebuttal, his voice faltering. "Ms. Ellis, you're making this personal," he said, the words weak, almost pleading. Amara's response was calm, devastating. "It's always been personal, Mr. Caldwell. For you, this is a debate. For me, it's my life." The crowd gasped, some standing to applaud, their cheers drowning out the Yale team's protests. A professor in the back wiped his eyes, his head bowed. Even Vance looked shaken, his gavel limp in his hand. Amara's closing statement was a masterclass in power and precision. Abolishing affirmative action without addressing systemic inequity is like treating a broken leg with a Band-Aid. You can't fix what you refuse to see. And I see it. I've lived it. And I'm not the only one. She turned to the crowd, her voice steady but fierce, her eyes sweeping the room. "Every one of you who laughed when I walked on stage, you're part of the problem, but you can also be part of the solution. Start listening. Start learning. Start changing." The room exploded, a cacophony of cheers and applause. Students stood, some shouting her name, others clapping until their hands stung. Ethan stared at the floor, his teammates silent, their defeat palpable. Professor Vance banged his gavel, but no one listened. The power had shifted, irrevocably. Amara stood tall, her notebook closed, her eyes scanning the crowd. Not for approval, but for accountability, demanding they see her not as an exception, but as a reckoning. The judge's decision was unanimous, delivered with a gravity that silenced the room. Amara Ellis, representing a no-name community college, had won the Yale debate tournament, the first non-Ivy winner in over a decade. The crowd's cheers echoed as she accepted the trophy, her face calm but her eyes alight with quiet triumph. Ethan and his team slipped off the stage, their heads bowed, their earlier arrogance replaced by stunned silence. Professor Vance approached Amara afterward, his voice low, almost humbled. "I misjudged you, Miss Ellis. That was extraordinary." She nodded, polite but unyielding. "It's not about me, Professor. It's about the system." Later, as Amara packed her notebook, a group of students gathered around her, some from Yale, others from rival schools, their faces a mix of awe and curiosity. "How did you do that?" a girl asked, her voice trembling with admiration. Amara smiled faintly, her eyes soft but resolute. "I just told the truth. It's heavier than you think." She walked out of the lecture hall, the golden light fading behind her, her step steady, her future brighter than anyone in that room could have imagined. The crowd parted for her, some whispering her name, others watching in silence, as if witnessing a legend in the making. The screen fades to black, the narration returning, its cadence slow and resonant, each word weighted with meaning. Amara Ellis didn't just win a debate. She exposed a truth, that privilege hide behind words like merit and fairness, cloaking a system designed to favor the few. Her victory wasn't about one tournament, one stage, one girl. It was about every person who's been laughed at, dismissed, underestimated. Every voice told to stay silent. It was about the power of truth, the weight of knowledge, and the courage to speak when no one wants to listen. The narration pauses, letting the words linger, sinking into the viewer's heart. This isn't just Amara's story. It's the story of every underdog who refuses to bow, every outsider who dares to demand a seat at the table. And it's a reminder, the next time you laugh at someone on stage, make sure you know who they are, because they might just change the world. The screen brightens, revealing Amara's silhouette walking away, the Yale lecture hall a distant blur behind her. The narrator's voice returns, urgent and compelling, a call to action that demands response. If Amara's story moved you, if it made you question what fairness really means, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more stories that challenge, inspire, and demand justice. Because the truth, it's worth fighting for.